I was involved and still am in a lot of research enterprises, right? The production of approximately the equivalent of 30 PhDs. It's something like that.
Yeah.
And I watched scientists who were genuine scientists and scientists who were careerists and hucksters. And I watched how they operate. And it's so interesting because the scientists that actually discover something of value, and I would say the ones that have the deepest careers and the best relations with their students, the ones that are on the right path, they're suffused by a religious ethos. And it's very deep.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time, I wouldn't say mastering statistics because I'm no statistical genius, but understanding how to conduct a statistical analysis well enough so that I could do it and actually do it and actually understand it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized was, like, if you have a spreadsheet that's full of data, 100,000 data points, let's say, there is an indefinite number of ways that you can apprehend that matrix, that you can see it, right? There's all the possible combinations of the numbers in the matrix.
Right.
Okay. So then out of that, you can draw a discovery, let's say, that's revealed in the patterns, but you cannot do that if your orientation to the spreadsheet is the progression of your career. The pathways that make themselves manifest in the numbers will be those that further your career. So this is part of the problem of replicability. So
p-hacking, right? This is
exactly. You can do an infinite number of correlational analysis. And if you do 100 of them, 5 of them will be statistically significant.
Right.
Well, you can just ignore the fact that 95% of them weren't and report on those 5%. And the thing is, there's a profound pull to do that, because in any given experiment, you might have devoted 2 years of your life. For a graduate student, the success of the analysis might determine whether or not they get their PhD. Like, there's a lot at stake. And so then you might say, well, why not just discover within the matrix of numbers the pathway that furthers your career? And the answer to that is, well, that's a complicated problem. It's like, is there anything other than self-promotion? Well, I told my students, if you allow your careerist interests to determine the decisions you make when you're conducting your statistics, which will be well hidden from everyone else, but also from yourself, one of the negative consequences is that, well, you betray the spirit of science, and so you pull the rug out from underneath yourself, but you also convince yourself of the existence of a delusion that you might then chase for the rest of your life, right? So it's so interesting. And this is something that scientists don't really concentrate on. It's like, how do you inculcate in the scientific investigator the ethos that produces the desire to search for truth and not career success, let's say, at every micro level of the scientific endeavor? And I think that once the scientific endeavor becomes sufficiently dissociated from its underlying Judeo-Christian narrative, there is no protection against that. And I also think that's why the scientific enterprise is corrupting so rapidly.
Well, what is the greatest example of the phenomenon you're describing that's recently been in the public eye? I would argue it's Ketanji Brown Jackson in the Supreme Court citing a study that Black babies have better health outcomes when they're in danger if they go to Black doctors. And she cites this in defense of all sorts of things like affirmative action and race-conscious preferences in hiring and so forth. Now, I rather doubt that Ketanji Brown Jackson realizes this, but that's a junk study. And it's a junk study for exactly the reason that you're describing, which is that there's a hidden variable, and the hidden variable is birth weight.
An infinite number of hidden variables.
Exactly. But the one that really counts here is birth weight. So when babies have a low or dangerous birth weight, they are more likely to be taken to white doctors, whatever the reason for that is. And so in that case, they'll have worse health outcomes because you're dealing with...
Because more of the specialists are white.
Yes.
Yeah,
right. The authors of this...
That's why... Well, that's so much of medical science and social science is corrupted by the fact of specious correlations.
Yes, and the authors of the study were aware of this variable, and as were the reviewers, and discounted it purposefully. So it's an instance of exactly the sort of thing that you are describing, of filtering out that data. And yes, in that context, of course, science, real science, the handmaiden of knowledge, one of the most ancient and beautiful human practices, is going to become the science, capital T, capital S, and endorse Kamala Harris in Scientific American. Because then you've got to serve something, right? You've got to attach this enterprise to some sort of purpose.
So then you might ask, as a mentor to scientists, well, I'm telling you to do something difficult. I'm saying that if the data reveals, for example, that your study is flawed, fatally, you're going to have to accept that. If the study indicates that the hypothesis upon whose promotion you've staked your reputation is wrong, you're going to have to admit that. And you're going to have to suffer the consequences of both of those. Maybe you won't get your PhD. Maybe you'll have to do another series of studies. Maybe your career won't advance properly. Maybe you'll be humiliated as a consequence of your previous claims. Okay, so then you might say, well, if that's the cost, then, well, why not just falsify? This is the temptation of the lie constantly. Why not just falsify? And I would say on the positive side, the negative side is, well, that's wrong, and maybe you'll get caught, and that'll be a catastrophe, and the abyss is there, and all of that. But you could say, well, I don't care. Like Raskolnikov says in Crime and Punishment, I'm not going to get caught. So we're not worried about that. And if I can lie to further my career, then so be it. Okay, so then you might say, well, why not do that? Because I think the question isn't ever why lie. The question always is, why not lie? And in the scientific realm, what you sacrifice if you deceive yourself and others in the service of your career is the discovery of the concordance between your soul and the logos of the world. Because there isn't anything more enthusiasm provoking than actually discovering something new. And it's because you get a sense of the eternal harmony between things. You think, oh, that realization, which is a new form of truth, is of so much value that the price I paid for that, sacrifice my old presumptions, that my career has taken a strange path as I pursue the truth, that's irrelevant in comparison to the profundity of, I think it's the establishment of that harmony between soul and cosmos. It's something like that.
It's raw joy. I mean, that's the treasure in the field. The man sells everything.
That's right. That's the pearl of great price. Exactly. That's exactly right.
And one of the most striking things you said to me in Athens was you told the story of realizing that most of what you said early on in your career, you didn't believe, or you didn't have the reason to believe, or there was some element of dishonesty.
Of lies.
Yes. And you said, I decided to tell the truth and see where it would take me. And that whatever happens to you because of the truth is going to be better than anything else.
Even if you don't know it. I think that's really the conclusion that Job draws. It's that, and it's also the act of faith that Abraham performs when he makes his multitude of sacrifices, because God comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure, right? God comes to say to Abraham, you're content and satiated, but that's not enough.
Leave everything behind.
Father, that's right. Fields. Well, why?
Right.
Well, okay, so now Abraham agrees. He's going to do this. So he follows the divine path of adventure. Now he has to make sequential sacrifices as he moves up, because he has to dispense with what's no longer appropriate as his capacity expands. He transforms so radically that he gets a new name, right? And he kind of encounters every adventure in the world as he grows. And that's also what makes him the father of nations. So he starts, it's so cool. It's such a great idea. The idea is that the forthright adherence to the clarion call of divine adventure is the same pathway that radically increases what the evolutionary biologists would describe as reproductive success, right? Construed over a very long period of time. But it makes sense, right? Imagine that that your deepest instinct pulls you out into the world beyond your zone of comfort and impels you to develop. Well, obviously that's going to make you more attractive to people of the opposite sex. But then also obviously, if you're a contender in that manner, you can wrestle with serpents, you can handle serpents without being bitten, and you teach your children that, well, you establish that ethos of divine patriarchy. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah. Well, why wouldn't your descendants be numerous and take over the world, so to speak? That's the promise of the covenant in the Old Testament.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is all these things shall be added unto you.
Right.
All the stuff that you just talked about, that you give up, all your career advancement, all your readiness to throw yourself at the feet of the first person that's going to give you a Nobel Prize or whatever shiny thing you're chasing after. You got to get rid of all of that in order to seek the kingdom of heaven first, in order to love the good for its own sake.
Right.
And that stripping that you're describing in sacrifice is kind of...
Well, and Christ extends that, because he says that extends beyond your commitments to career, let's say, or even to the benefits of life more abundant and material prosperity. He said you also have to do that even in relationship to your own family, right? Is that every single thing that's good has to be sacrificable to the highest possible good.
Exactly. And then out of that source will arise all the other goods.
That's why Abraham gets Isaac back, as far as I'm concerned, right? Because he's willing to offer his son to the same process that impelled him out of his immature satiation. He offers his son fully, and the consequence of that is he gets him back.
Right.
And I think that's exactly right, is that I do believe that, and I see that all the time, is that the more you try to conserve your children and pull them to you and shelter them from the adventure of their life, the more they're going to struggle to get away from you and to have nothing to do with you. And if instead you throw them out into the world, then that paradoxically increases the probability that you'll establish a relationship with them that will be sustainable through the entire course of your existence.